Hey everyone, welcome back to another professional picks video. We are now in week 8 of the NFL season, and we're talking about our survivor picks this week as always. In week 7, a few teams got bounced, but the most notable being the Buccaneers, losing even as 10-point favorites to the Panthers that seem to be in shambles. If you took my advice and took the best pick of the Patriots over the Bears on Monday night, then you're probably sitting pretty and looking to pounce in week 8. Um, in week 8, we're going to look at the potential picks, and I've expanded the list to more than just the normal 7 teams. This week, we're going to look at 9 different teams. And the reason being, number one, there were a lot of close games this week, and I think it'd be good to talk about more than just a handful. But also, as we get later into the season, I recognize that you afforded less options in Survivor. There's a good chance there's a lot of people out there that have already picked some combination of the Bills, Cowboys, or Eagles, or even all three of them at some point this year. So it's good to talk about just a little bit more games. And as always, we're going to take a look at the schedule when we're making our Survivor picks. Even if we're just focusing on winning this week, it is good and helpful and just good practice to take a look at the week ahead and the schedule ahead, just so you can try to plan out your picks. Because inevitably there's going to be one really tough week in Survivor that you want to be prepared for. But as always, it's most important to win this week, because if you don't win week 8, you're not making it to week 10 anyways. Well, we'll start off the teams with our, weekly take heed and perceive with caution of these teams. If you watch enough videos, you know that I'm always wary of divisional games, especially when you're on the road. And that's exactly the situation the Titans see themselves in. Coming off a big home win against divisional opponent Indianapolis Colts, Titans are feeling good running behind Derrick Henry. Although Ryan Tannehill knocked out of the game at the tail end of the fourth quarter there with Malik Willis getting some snaps. That might be something to keep an eye on, especially. But even if Tannehill was fully healthy and playing, this would still be a game you want to think twice about. And that's because simply for the fact that these guys are playing a divisional opponent on the road and only favored by 3.5 points. It's supposed to be a pretty close game already. And I think divisional games are always tighter than the spread implies, no matter what. Let's not forget, just earlier this season, week 1, the biggest favorites of the week were the Colts, who played at the Texans, again, divisional opponent in Houston. And, the Texans should have probably won that game the way it was going, but allowed the Colts to tie the game up. So crazy things happen. And another example with the Texans was last year, the Titans, who had the best record in the AFC, allowed the Texans to come into Nashville and beat them on their home turf. So these AFC South games and a lot of divisional games are always a lot closer than they probably appear on paper. And so it's something that's probably best to stay away from, especially when, one last point, when the Texans are winless and looking and hungry to get just one win in the W count. So that's something you should definitely keep an eye on. It's not saying stay away from it at all costs, but really think hard before you pick the Titans this week. And for the best pick, I was having a hard time deciding, so I decided to pick all three. I think you'd be very safe and well off with picking the Bills, Cowboys, or Eagles against their opponents, all home games, and I'll touch on each one individually. And we'll start out with the Bills. This spread, more about the Packers' ineptness on offense. Without David Bakhtiari and this shifting offensive line, the running game hasn't been nearly as effective in Green Bay as it had been to start the season. And on top of that, and definitely a worse problem, is the wide receivers and Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball to them, just the passing game in general. Obviously, Rodgers has that thumb element that's affecting him in some way, because the throws that he's making are just not as sharp and not as precise as what I'm used to seeing Rodgers throughout his career. You can make the argument that he's getting older, but just the last 2 years he was MVP. He couldn't have fallen off that much. So that hand issue on his throwing hand is certainly impacting it. But even when Rodgers does make precise throws, it seems like his wide receivers are dropping the ball left and right. Even Allen Lazard, who's supposed to be his most trusty receiver, is still dropping some of these balls that he's throwing to him. And it's very frustrating to watch as a Packers fan. And if you can't do the right things against the Jets, the Giants, and the Washington Commanders, then you're really gonna have a tough time against the Bills, who seemingly have no weakness and coming off a bye week in this week 7. So expect the Packers offensive woes to continue, and their defense, no defense is good enough to stop the Bills from putting up 20, 24, 30 points. So expect the Bills to roll over the Packers here and get another abysmal performance from this Green Bay offense. Talking about the Cowboys here, I really like this matchup against the Bears for them because of the Bears offense versus that Cowboys defense. I really like what Dan Quinn is doing with his defensive personnel and schemes, and he's got a lot of good players that he can move around. Obviously, number one being Micah Parsons, who seems to play nearly every single position on the football field. And when you get a defensive coordinator that knows what he's doing, like Dan Quinn, and a weapon so versatile like Micah Parsons, that can allow for a lot of creative and disruptive defensive schemes and play calling. And that's exactly what's happening against this Bears offense that is really predicated on the run game and nothing else because the offensive line gives no time really for Justin Fields to make throws. Justin Fields takes too long to make his reads and make throws. And even when his receivers are open, if you thought the Packers receiving core was bad, well, the Chicago Bears receiving core is even worse. So they really have nothing going from an offense. And this Cowboys defense just relatively shut down the Lions, who have one of the better offensive outputs in football. This Bears team's gonna have a really tough time against them. I don't think that the Cowboys need to put up much points to win this one. This is a low scoring total with a big spread. Usually those games are very safe for the Cowboys here. And then the Eagles being minus 9.5 at open against the Steelers after their loss on Monday Night Football. Eagles with the bye week on week 7. So not as much to say about them, but nothing's really changed for the Eagles. They look really good on offense and look really good on defense. And I could highlight a lot of players on both sides of the football, but an offense that obviously comes with Jalen Hurts and its versatility in both the run and the pass game, which he's always had the run game down, but his passing approach and attack has been so much more on point this year. I think obviously having AJ Brown helps out, and Devonta Smith being a year 2 receiver and looking much more coming into his own this year. And the defensive side of the football, good guys in both the front seven and the secondary, but really the secondary led by Darius Slay and James Bradbury, who they got in the offseason, is just shutting down all the passing game. They just got so many good players in the interior D line. If you can get a good pass rush from interior D linemen like Fletcher Cox and rookie Jordan Davis, that is huge. As well as those guys are really good at stopping the run. So not a lot of holes in this Eagles team facing a Steelers team that still a lot of question marks. It doesn't seem like Trubisky or Kenny Pickett is really the answer right now at quarterback, and definitely not in win now mode. So it's a good time for the Eagles to pounce on a weak Steelers team. Taking a look at our best value here, just want to analyze the schedule here. If you're looking at this, you're saying, okay, well, Tennessee at Houston, not the best spot on the road, so I can probably wait to get them in like Denver or even Houston at home down the road. Minnesota and Philly, you're going to be able to pick them more than likely next week. So if you're between this Dallas, Buffalo, and Philly pick, you could probably lay off on Philly because of the fact that they have two really pretty favorable matchups in the next couple of weeks, and then Dallas is a bye next week, but not many picks later in the season for Dallas. And the biggest one is like the Colts here and the Jaguars. You're really not going to be taking too many times this season. The Colts not till the tail end, Jaguars not till they travel to Detroit to play the Lions. This Jags team, they were value once and they came up for the win, but it's a scary team to bet on and in your survivor pick. So I think the best value here is the Colts, who have slightly a better chance to win the Jaguars. And as I mentioned, the Dolphins and Vikings have pretty easy schedules in the near future, but the Colts don't. Colts are at home against the Commanders team that has beaten the Bears on Thursday night and the Packers last week. This -4 spread implies that if it was played at a neutral field, that the Colts would only be favored by 1. So in theory, these two teams match up, pretty tightly towards one another. But I think the Colts, coming off a loss, playing at home, that obviously bodes well, trying to build momentum and hold on to, a shot at this division title. I think the Commanders with Taylor Heineke is an upgrade over Carson Wentz, but this team, if the Commanders commits a lot of turnovers, as the Colts do sometimes too, but they don't force a lot of turnovers, and that's going to be the downfall of this game, I think. So I like Matt Ryan and the Colts running the game to get it going, control the ball, and allow your defense to play some opportune football and turn the ball over from the Commanders once or twice to give your team the lead. I think this is going to be a close game. I wouldn't be super confident. And as a -4 spread, you're never going to be incredibly confident. But I think this is a good situation for the Colts to bounce back, and win against a turnover-prone football team, and just kind of hold on to the ball with their strong run game. Talking about the other picks for the rest of the week, as I know you guys are probably interested in just about all these, if not more. Falcons at Panthers. I was originally thinking about making this a proceed with caution, red flag kind of game, but I think this Panthers win at home against the Buccaneers, that big upset, was more of an emotional win. They just got rid of their coach. They just got rid of their best player in Christian McCaffrey. I think a lot of that team was saying enough's enough. I know we're not a good football team, but we're not taking this anymore. There's some element of pride in that for the Panthers team that game. And I think that's what really came out, just kind of a retaliation. And especially coupled with the fact that the Buccaneers have lost their identity on both offense and defense. It's a very opportune moment for the Panthers. If that game was in Tampa Bay, there's probably a different outcome, just for the fact that energy would not have been on their side. But here at the Falcons are rolling right now. They're looking really good this season, despite what a lot of people, myself included, said about them in preseason. Mariota looks like a very solid quarterback. The defense is playing very solid. They're clicking right now. Despite their personnel, the team is playing very well. And when you're playing good team football, you're going to beat a lot of inferior teams, despite maybe a lack of talent seemingly on the Falcons side. But I think at home, again, coming off a loss, I think the Falcons' main weakness was exposed by Joe Burrow, was the big plays in the passing game. I don't think the Panthers have that in them too much. And so I think the Falcons here match up well against the Panthers, whereas they didn't last week against the Bengals. And look for the Falcons to bounce back relatively easily against the Panthers at home. Cardinals at Vikings. Vikings here, 4-point favorites. I mentioned in the schedule, you get some good situations for the Vikings coming up soon. But that being said, I think the Vikings win this one coming off a bye week. I know the Cardinals are too, but the Cardinals, while they are getting DeAndre Hopkins back and have him back, who will be, bigger for this team as Cardinals coming off a win against the Saints on Thursday Night Football. It's going to take some of the pressure off Kyler Murray and the rest of that receiving core, but I'm not sure if it's going to be enough, given the fact that they have such a weakness in the run game on offense and just the passing game on defense. I think the Vikings here, with a heavy dose of Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson, will be too much for this Cardinals defense. As long as Kirk Cousins doesn't commit a ton of turnovers, just like Andy Dalton did, then they should be fine. This Cardinals defense is really not that good. Despite forcing 3 turnovers, they still let up 32 points to the Saints, who were without basically every wide receiver on their roster, and Andy Dalton, who's playing terrible. So as long as Kirk Cousins doesn't play like primetime Kirk Cousins, but plays like 12 o'clock Kirk Cousins, then he'll be fine. And I have a feeling that's what's going to happen out of a bye week here. And I think the Vikings put up way too many points for the Cardinals to handle this game. For the Jaguars against the Broncos, I like this situation because this -4 spread is on a neutral field. They're playing in London, so the Jaguars are truly 4 points better than the Broncos, regardless who's playing quarterback for the Broncos, whether it be Russell Wilson or the backup. They just can't get anything going on offense. They have no offensive output. Their defense is solid, but when your team can't top 10 points a game, then you're just truly not going to win too many football games. And so I see nothing in the Broncos offense that, says that that's going to change anytime soon. And with that, it's probably good to keep going with the Jaguars. They've been so close so many weeks, and they played the Giants tough, who all of a sudden are a good football team, seemingly both sides of the offense, or both sides of the football on offense and defense. So I think objectively, this Jags might be the best pick of all of the other picks, because they're the only team that's truly favored by 4 points, because all these other teams are at home. All these other teams that are at home aren't favored by more than 7. So if we're looking for a home team, this Jaguars as a home team is a good pick, playing in London. But I just think that, Travis Etienne getting better, adjusted to this offense, looking better each week. If they just don't have as many turnovers, fumbling the ball, going for it on 4th down, the Jaguars beat the Giants. I think if they play turnover-free football, or at least smarter football, they're going to beat this Broncos team that has really a hard time putting up points. And then finally, the Dolphins at the Lions. -3 here is what it was at open. I was kind of surprised by that, as I think that the Dolphins match up pretty well against these guys. I thought the spread would be bigger, even being on the road. The Dolphins with Tua when he's playing with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have a very deadly passing attack and just put up chunk plays, big yardage, and big points. And that is something that the Lions defense cannot stop to save their life. So the Dolphins here, I think, will have no trouble putting on the points. And you then look at the Lions, they have a really high-powered offense, but when you place a solid defense in front of them, they struggle. And that is something the Dolphins have been this year. Not the greatest defensive unit in football, but certainly solid and above average. And really, it's been their front seven doing the job, not their secondary, as a lot of people expected. But they've been able to generate a pretty good pass rush, which neutralizes a lot of offensive output, no matter how good your receivers and quarterback is. If you can disrupt the timing of the throwing game, then it makes a big difference. And that's what the Dolphins have been doing, especially the Lions, considering that Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was out with a concussion, might not be playing this game either. It swings even further in the Vikings' favor. I think there's going to be a lot of points this game. And because of that, being such a small margin for a spread, it's probably best to stay away. But just in my mind, I think the Dolphins are going to put up so many points here and really have no problems on offense that I see no way the Lions can win this game against a pretty formidable Dolphins defense. But that is the video, and those are the teams we want to discuss this week. Again, try to make a wider selection here. This is every team that's favored by more than 3 points. Again, I talked about it in one of my other videos, but if you're looking at a team that's favored by more than 3 points, 70% of the time that team is going to lose if they're either on the road and or playing a divisional opponent. So something that you always want to try to avoid, especially as the stakes get higher later in the season. You want to take teams that are favored by more than 3 points and playing at home against a non-divisional opponent, if at all possible. And you got a lot of games here to choose from. So I hope I could help educate your decision. But at the end of the day, it's all up to you, and best of luck in Survivor in week 8.